A new president, in my view, should be sworn in 30 days after the election. They can all drag their asses back to town and take care of business and come back and then go on vacation. That is Congress. So the first Tuesday in December, in my view, is when the swearing in of the new president should take place. And there needs to be restrictive language addressing presidents who conduct themselves like dictators in the final months of a presidency. That handcuffs them. And so that should be the 12th proposed reform amendment for the Article 5 Convention of States. Because the amount of damage this man is doing on the way out the door is really incredible. Here's an example. From Hans von Spakovsky over at Conservative Review. Federal Commissioner, Department of Homeland Security election power grab raises huge questions and red flags. Remember, we talked about the potential of the Secretary of DHS, this lightweight, this clown, Jay Johnson. And they kept showing ankle on the effort to try and nationalize the elections. Well, guess what they just did? Jay Johnson rushed through a designation of the nation's state and local election systems as, quote, critical infrastructure, unquote. Why now, after the election, and in the waning days of the Obama administration? And Hans is right. Christy McCormick, a commissioner on the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, EAC, is raising these questions and even more serious inquiries about Johnson's actions. The EAC is the federal agency charged with being the national clearinghouse and resource for state and local election officials on the best practices and standards in administering elections. So why is DHS bigfooting all over the EAC's turf? In announcing the designation, Johnson declared that elections should be a priority for cybersecurity assistance and protection from the federal government. The January 6th designation, he said, was simply the right and obvious thing to do. Yet the formal designation itself admitted that many states and local election officials are opposed to this designation. The day before the announcement, Johnson had a nationwide telephone conference call with election officials. And according to McCormick, it was billed by DHS as a call to inform them of Johnson's current thinking on whether or not to designate elections as critical infrastructure. So he deceived them. At the same time, McCormick said election officials were still asking for information about the designation. After all, she noted Johnson had never conducted a discussion or review of what the designation means or its benefits. And she added, election officials have never been given an adequate opportunity to engage in decision-making process. Rather, she said, Johnson discarded and dismissed the opinions and concerns of the secretaries of state and the EAC commissioners, the very people who actually have deep professional experience in conducting and administering elections. His unilateral action, she said, blindsided election officials in our states. In fact, McCormick said that when they spoke with or were briefed by DHS officials on other occasions, sometimes even less than an hour later, there was different or additional information provided by or leaked by the media by DHS officials. So essentially, McCormick argues Johnson borrowed a pen and phone from his outgoing boss in a Friday night drop, and the designation is near all-encompassing, covering virtually everything that state and local election officials do and giving federal officials unprecedented access to state databases. Anticipating objections, Johnson declared that the designation does nothing to change the role state and local governments have in administering and running elections and does not represent a federal takeover. But as Hans pointed out back in August, this designation could give the Department of Justice access to any and every election and voting location they deem threatened. If this authority is misused, it could allow the feds to demand changes be made to election and voting systems, regardless of the views of local officials. Now, let me stop here. When I wrote the Liberty Amendment several years ago, I read the available material on the state ratification conventions. And several of them insisted that the details of the election process be left with the states or they would never ratify the Constitution. And that's exactly what the Constitution does. It's why states decide what times the polls will be open. States decide where the polls will be. States decide on election judges and all the rest of it. States decide on whether there's early voting and those sorts of things. States decide when there's absentee voting. And I guarantee you, because that's what these statists do, now they have taken the first step in nationalizing the process of state and local elections. And he did it under cover of dark, and he did it in the last minute, and he did it on purpose. And nobody's talking about it. Everybody's flat-footed. Instead, the liberal media has us chasing shiny objects again. McCormick raised the same issue, questioning the so-called benefits of this designation, and also said that serious questions still remain about the roles of other federal agencies, such as the Department of Justice. During the conference call with Johnson, he told election officials their participation was voluntary. However, he did say that if they didn't volunteer, they would not be able to receive information from DHS to secure their own systems, McCormick notes. And McCormick further argues that Johnson's action politicizes elections. He bypassed the EAC, which was set up by Congress as a bipartisan, independent agency to guard against having elections handled or governed by a partisan branch of the federal government that is under the control of whatever party occupies the White House. She also points out that this designation creates a layer of non-transparency and unnecessary federally controlled bureaucracy. Elections need to be transparent. This is why the states allow outside observers at all levels of the election process. But McCormick notes the critical infrastructure designation departs from that transparency standard and provides for the establishment of numerous councils and centers that will be out of the view of the public and run solely by federal bureaucrats. This is very, very bad, folks. She observes closed discussion or control of election administration by various councils and groups out of the view of the public does not engender faith or confidence in the elections. All right, let me cut to the chase. They just nationalized the election processes in our localities and states by claiming an emergency. Now, how many times have we been concerned about them claiming an emergency for this or that in order to come in and federalize and nationalize something? Well, they just did it. And now what they're going to do is slowly, step by step, take it over. Oh, we don't like where you have that polling place. Oh, no. You have to have officials that do X, Y, Z at that. No. The officials have to speak 4 languages. Oh, no. The bathrooms at the polling place have to look like that. This is just the beginning. Just the beginning. They have now nationalized our polling places. Congress didn't do it. There was no public debate about it. There were no hearings. On the way out the door, this clown Jay Johnson, who can't secure the border, who can't protect the country, this jerk has decided that this is what he's going to do. And I guarantee you he got the order from Obama. They hate federalism. They hate state sovereignty. They hate individual liberty. They hate mobility. They want uniformity, conformity, centralized, iron-fisted leftism. And that's what they just did. They just did it. And you haven't heard a damn thing about it on network, cable, or satellite TV. You've been hearing all day about ethics issues related to Trump, the money he has, his investments. Some fat slob jumped up, Office of Government Ethics, never saw the fat slob before. He's an Obama guy saying, no. The only way Trump can actually avoid ethics violations is to give up everything he owns. No ethics violations for Hillary Clinton, though. No ethics violations for Bill Clinton, though. No. Or Barack Milhouse, Benito Obama. No. They're all cool. Obama has violated the Constitution so often I can't even keep count. He's done enormous damage to the Constitution during the course of his presidency, and especially on the way out the back door. Nobody charges him with ethics violations now, do they? Well, I am. He's the most unethical president in modern American history. And the most lawless. He's never had a scandal, you know. Well, we know there's been multiple scandals, but the biggest scandal of all has been his abuse of the Constitution and the rule of law. His abuse of the executive branch departments and agencies. His making law without the American people knowing about it and without consulting Congress. Now, let me ask you a question. Where's the ethics agency that's going to charge him with that? Because he's not up for election, because they will not impeach him, because he's leaving office. There's not even any point in impeaching him. On the way out the door, he screws our allies, he rewards our enemies. He undermines the American people, does continuing damage to the rule of law. He nationalizes oceans and lands and now the election system. We've ceased being effectively a constitutional republic. When I talk about the Constitution and its history, the left laughs. They just laugh. What's the big deal? We have hearings where Pompeo's up to be CIA director. They spend the hearings talking about climate change. We have hearings where General Mattis is up for Secretary of Defense. They spend the hearings talking about transgender, bisexual, and all the rest of it. We have hearings for the wonderful man to be Attorney General of the United States, who did more to chase down the Klan in Alabama than any liberal who's questioning him, and they act like he's a Klansman. We have a spectacle of a President of the United States going into the biggest indoor stadium, non-sports stadium in the Western Hemisphere, loading it up with sycophants, with slobbering fools, where he gives the most pathetic speech one can possibly imagine. On full display, his nihilism and narcissism and radicalism. Country's in deep trouble. I know we all hope, and you all hope, that Donald Trump can save us. No, one president can't save us. They can slow this down. We can reverse some of these processes, some of these actions. But we have to save ourselves. We have to save ourselves through the constitutional system.